Well, it's not always easy to live in a decaying society. Watching civilization fall to pieces around you can really take a toll on your mental health, I think. And so it's understandable that we're sometimes inclined to tell ourselves comforting lies. We want to take solace in pleasant, encouraging myths and superstitions. And one such fiction is that we like to tell ourselves is that we can escape our cultural decay by just moving away from it physically. We like to pretend that most of the really crazy and disturbing stuff happening in our country can be avoided by simply living somewhere that isn't San Francisco or Seattle or Austin, Texas, or anywhere in Vermont. But that's not the case, because the media, the internet, federal government, the education system, they act as a delivery service for all manner of perversion and moral insanity, and they're everywhere. You can't completely escape it no matter where you go. You cannot socially distance yourself away from this contagion unless you're moving all the way into like the unexplored regions of the Amazon or somewhere like that. It is still certainly a good idea to stay away from the most demented leftist hellholes. It's possible to find places in America that are much better and safer than that. Well, they'll never be completely safe. And that's an important thing to realize so that we don't let our guard down completely. For example, Idaho is about as red as a red state can get politically. It's voted for the Republican candidate in every presidential election since forever. I mean, at least for the past 40 years and longer. And yet, as Libs of TikTok reports today, the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare is teaming up with an activist group to provide porn literacy materials for children in school. The Idaho Freedom Foundation organization has more details about this. Quote, Idaho's Department of Health and Welfare implements a sex education curriculum endorsed by Planned Parenthood in its schools. The curriculum and training for sex education facilitators is purchased from an interest group that promotes queering education and normalizing the consumption of pornography. Idaho law requires sex education taught in public schools to reinforce traditional family arrangements. IDHW promotes what Idaho law prohibits, however. IDHW takes funds from federal programs like the Personal Responsibility Education Program and Title V Sexual Risk Avoidance Education. Then IDHW acquires sex education products from nonprofits like Education Training and Research Organization, which is ETR, whose curriculum is developed and endorsed by Planned Parenthood. Yes, Planned Parenthood has taken a special interest in sex education, not just in Idaho, but across the country for a long time. It's not difficult to see why. Sexualizing kids at younger and younger ages means more and more customers for them in the long run. The earlier that they sexualize kids, then the more reckless sexual behavior you can expect, and then the more quote-unquote unwanted pregnancies, the more STDs, and then you get the more people walking into Planned Parenthood clinics. So it's from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense for them. Here's a little more from the report. It says, ETR's Reducing the Risk curriculum promises to teach abstinence, but instead ETR delivers a variety of approaches, including an LGBTQ inclusive curriculum that queers education with an emphasis on gender identity, sexual orientation, and behavior. ETR also advocates for teaching elementary students about porn literacy, which involves instruction on kink and power, pleasure, sexual identity, sexual acts, and sexual exploration in relation to pornography. Now, if you'd like to know more about porn literacy, or even if you don't, either way, here's a video from ETR explaining. Watch.
We can promote a shame-free educational space by letting young people know that it's okay if they are curious. It's okay if they have watched porn, and it's okay if they have thought about porn. I always make sure to say someone being curious about sex and or porn does not make them a bad person. It makes them human. It's so important we normalize that this is a natural human experience. And I also want to make a point to share that not wanting to watch porn is also completely fine. There's no judgment and shame for not being curious. That's okay too. And we want to create environments in the classroom where students don't shame each other.
So as an educator, my job is to provide information about sexual health and have students critically think by exploring all sides of an issue. Critical thinking skills are the largest component of porn literacy. It's the ability for young people to analyze and ask questions about the media that they're viewing. Critical thinking skills allow young people to understand the intention behind pornography.
So much of sex education is reflecting on our values and beliefs in relation to a topic, and porn literacy is no exception. For facilitators, it's first important for them to reflect on their reasons for wanting to teach porn literacy. Do they want to teach porn literacy because they believe watching porn and by extension sex work is inherently bad and they want to stop young people from accessing it? That's unfortunately not going to lead to good conversations because it's pushing one agenda, that porn is bad.
No, we wouldn't want to give the kids a negative view of hardcore porn. You know, we don't want to bias 9-year-olds against pornography before they've even had a chance to check out Pornhub for themselves. We wouldn't want to do that. The real goal, they say, is to teach critical thinking skills to the porn viewer. Yes, because pornography is famous for its ability to nurture critical thinking skills. Everyone knows that the average porn viewer is only watching it so that he can hone his skills of discernment, which is quite a euphemism. Now, however, if we leave the land of make-believe and we come back to Realityville, which is where I prefer to live, we can plainly see that the opposite is the case. Porn actually destroys critical thinking. This is why porn viewers become less discerning the more they watch. Porn manipulates the brain. It floods its reward systems with dopamine and creates an effect similar to a drug. Research has shown that over time, this process results in increasingly dire physical changes to the brain itself. I mean, porn changes your brain physically. You can see it on a brain scan. It warps it and rewires it. Porn has an especially corrosive effect on the prefrontal cortex, which is precisely the part of the brain most involved in critical thinking and discernment. As an article in neurosciencenews.com says, porn use has been correlated with erosion of the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain that houses executive functions like morality, willpower, and impulse control. To better understand the role of this structure in behavior, it's important to know that it remains underdeveloped during childhood. This is why children struggle to regulate their emotions and impulses. Damage to the prefrontal cortex in adulthood is termed hypofrontality, which predisposes an individual to behave compulsively and make poor decisions. Does that remind you of anyone? Like everyone? Does it remind you of everyone? You know, if it seems like people these days are stuck in perpetual adolescence, their maturation stunted, lingering in a kind of juvenile state forever, that's not your imagination. That is, in fact, what's happening. And rampant porn use in childhood has much to do with this problem. It's not the only culprit. It's not the only thing causing the problem, but it's definitely contributing to it. Kids are being exposed to material that corrodes the very parts of their brain necessary for attaining intellectual maturity. If we want children to learn critical thinking, the very last thing we should ever do is introduce them to pornography. Of course, there are many other reasons to refrain from intentionally exposing them to sexual content, reasons both scientific and moral, not to mention legal. It's against the law to do exactly what this Idaho sex ed program has declared its intention to do, and what so many other sex ed programs across the country do every single day. Now, the fact that this sort of insanity is happening in a sex ed program in Idaho only goes to show, once again, that sex education is hopelessly flawed as a concept. There is no rescuing it. There is no good version of sex ed. All sex ed traces back to Alfred Kinsey and is structured on his theories of human sexuality. Even abstinence-only sex ed is absurd because it is abstinence education fundamentally built on the work of a degenerate pedophile. None of these conversations have any place in the school system, and no matter what you do, no matter what sort of sex ed program you devise, it will always devolve into this sort of thing, always, every time. Porn literacy and all the other varieties of perversion. That's always what it turns into. And that's because this is what sex ed was always meant to be and to achieve. This is its natural and intended endpoint. Alfred Kinsey, looking up from hell while roasting in the flames, probably takes at least a little bit of pleasure amid his eternal damnation in the fact that sex ed has turned into exactly what he wanted it to be. He's looking up from hell at sex ed and porn literacy and saying, yes, exactly. See, that's what I wanted. And that's why he's where he is right now. Now, we might also ask why there would be such an insistence on exposing kids to porn. I mean, it's not like anyone needs help finding it. We already live in a porn-addicted society. Everyone is familiar, with porn, certainly, and everyone is familiar with the staggering numbers that places like Pornhub boast, at the end of each year, the many billions of collective hours Americans spend watching porn, the many and increasingly disgusting varieties and genres they explore, and so on. And we're all familiar with that. And it's not just Pornhub enjoying the windfall. The CEO of OnlyFans, who we know, by the way, almost nothing about. Okay, we know his name. We don't know anything else about this guy. He escapes media scrutiny despite being the most prolific pimp in the history of the world, perhaps second only to Hugh Hefner. But he has earned $500 million just over the past 2 years, $500 million in his pocket from OnlyFans. Suffice it to say that people are watching lots and lots of porn already. So why do activists and school teachers, but I repeat myself, want to get even more people sucked into this world? Because here's the answer. When a person is addicted to porn, they are exactly where our culture wants them to be and how it wants them to be. So as already established, porn tends to erode your critical thinking skills, your powers of discernment and self-control. That is all advantageous to the left. I mean, they love that. Porn isolates people, makes them lonely, emotionally and spiritually desolate and desperate. Porn also obviously militates against all of the traditional values, which we used to call virtues: chastity, temperance, patience, humility. All dwindle away through porn consumption. So, isolated, undiscerning, lacking in self-control, lacking in critical thinking, lonely, intemperate, unchaste. That's how the left wants us. Because for one thing, it makes us easier to control.